In the last episode of Prelude to the Ruin War, we had discovered what the Siritan Empire had, discovered when it came to the Yavetans and the Bastilians. In today's episode, part 2 of Prelude to the Ruin War, we're going to be taking a look at the other two primary factions that were heavily impacted by the Ruin War, these being the Barramon as well as humanity. Now we're going to start off with Barramon first. Barramon was a bit interesting. Keep in mind that the majority of these investigations into other territories largely happened around the same time. However, the Siritan Empire encountered the Barramon first out of all four of them. The Barramon had gone almost completely radio silent. Not long after this, however, the Siritan Empire had discovered what could best be described as Barramon refugees on their borders. For whatever reason, the Barramon were slowly trickling in, usually a few vessels at a time, of all things requesting that they are given asylum within the Siritan Empire. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire weren't particularly fond about this idea. I'll leave you guys to figure out why. But needless to say, they said no multiple times. Eventually, the Siritan Empire encountered a species-wide mass exodus. Is that the proper word? Probably. A mass exodus from their territory. The Barramon were coming in massive, what could best be described as multiple death fleets at once. Once again, they were not intending to attack the Siritan Empire. If anything, they almost seemed like they were running from something. What in the name of all of reality could possibly force the Barramon of all things to run? It's similar to Warhammer 40k and Orcs. The Orcs don't run from something. They run to something, oftentimes to try and murder it. The Barramon are much in the same way, although they do use a little bit of tactics here and there. Suffice to say, though, the Barramon aren't cowards, and to retreat from a battle, even one that seems hopeless, isn't incredibly common. But the fact of the matter is that we as the outside viewers know what's going on. Leviathan, as well as all other plague fleets, are slowly gaining more and more biomass, and they're invading into the other territories. Now, an important thing to remember about the Barramon is this. Despite the fact that the only thing that truly separates them from the Plague's territories is humanity, the Barramon have almost no contact whatsoever. The Yavetans, the Bastilians, the Florians, humanity, and the Siritans have plenty of experience with them, but the Barramon have never encountered anything like the Blight Plague. Needless to say, having a massive, most likely multiple tens, if not hundreds, of different plague fleets going after their entire territory is going to cause some damage. The main reason is because Barramon primarily like to focus on melee combat. It's far more visceral, quite literally being toe-to-toe with your enemy as you, cut them down, shall we say. That's not to say that the Barramon don't use ranged combat, but the fact of the matter is that within their species, it's very rare. It's not rare in the same way with the Bastilians, how the Bastilians are utterly atrocious with ranged combat, but more so that the Barramon's technology primarily and heavily focuses on melee rather than the aforementioned ranged combat. That being said, you will find them, and they're usually fairly damn accurate. That being said, it's not common enough for something like the Blight Plague. As we know about the Blight Plague, the last thing that you want to do is get anywhere within melee range with this stuff. All it takes is surface skin contact, and you're dead, because it infects instantaneously. You simply have to touch it. It doesn't have to penetrate your body. It doesn't have to be an injury. It just has to touch you. The skin of an infected touching your skin is a death sentence. As a result, the Barramon don't really know how to fight this, and they're simply just choosing to retreat rather than attempt to find a way around this problem. Now, an important thing to know is that this Exodus fleet for whatever reason, only a small minority of them are requesting asylum within the Siritan Empire. The more the Siritans think about it, the more they realize that if this is some new Barramon strategy to get within Siritan territory so that they can start ripping shit up, it's an incredibly indirect way of doing it. And indirectness isn't really the way of the Barramon. Once again, if you want to think of Barramon, at least when it comes to their attitude and the way that they wage war, think of Warhammer 40k orcs, and you're pretty much there. They prefer to be in your face. They're not particularly fond of the idea of stabbing somebody in the back. There's certainly no blood axes within the Barramon society. So, the Siritan Empire decides that they are going to allow asylum for those who desire it. The majority of the Exodus fleet refused to accept asylum, however, and instead of asking permission to move along their way, simply, basically, in a very literal sense, brute force their way through the Siritan Empire's border patrols. Needless to say, there is a lot of miscommunication there and a few destroyed ships, but eventually the Siritan Empire, I guess, just let them go. It's very obvious that they have no intentions of actually fighting. In fact, this entire time the engagement was going on, the Barramon Exodus fleet basically completely ignored the Siritan patrol fleets, even as they were under fire by the Siritan patrol fleets. They basically ignored them and just beelined deep into Siritan's territory. The Siritans did end up sending multiple scout ships to follow them and report back information, and the most bizarre thing was getting sent back. The Barramon weren't going towards any particular strong point or fortress world or bastion world, let alone were they trying to go for the Siritan core system. No, the Barramon were going directly towards the Siritan's uncharted reality border. Basically, I've brought this up before. The entirety of reality as we know it, when I say that a certain faction holds X% of reality, is specifically the reality that has been charted. The reality that has been explored extensively. The factions more or less know what's there. Then, of course, there is the borders themselves between each of the factions. And finally, there is the final borders, which is between known reality and unknown or unexplored reality. The Barramon have absolutely no idea what's out there. The fact of the matter is that even the Siritan Empire isn't entirely certain what's out there, due to the fact that these expeditions oftentimes require enormous amounts of funding and supplies in order to send these exploration fleets out into uncharted territory. Not only this, but these fleets have to be equipped to be able to handle any problem that they run across on their own, due to the fact that they're in completely uncharted territory. There isn't going to be any reinforcements anytime soon. As a result, these fleets have to be completely self-sufficient. If they get attacked by an intelligent species that is very much hostile towards them, they have to be able to defend themselves. As a result, exploration by every single faction is gruelingly slow, which probably isn't a great way of saying that, but you get the idea. The Barramon are charging headlong into it. No hesitation whatsoever. They're going straight out into uncharted territory. And once again, the Siritans are kind of like, why stop them? You know, if the Barramon truly intend to wrap around and attack somewhere else within the Siritan Empire, I guess that's a bit of a problem, but at the same time, it seems like they have no interest in the Empire whatsoever and appear to just be going out in any direction just to get away from whatever's attacking them. Keep in mind that the Siritan Empire at this time don't really know what's attacking the other factions, and not only this, but the Barramon were slightly ahead of the other factions, especially when it came to the exploration fleets into the other factions' territory. As a result, the Barramon were sending multiple mixed signals, and due to the fact they had never encountered the Blight Plague before, they didn't have the name Blight Plague for it. They simply called it the Scourge. and it was absolutely annihilating their species. The Siritan Empire has no idea what the Scourge is, despite the fact that we as the outside viewer do. It's the Blight Plague. So as a result, the Siritan Empire are a little freaked out because, as I said before, the Barramon don't run from anything. They run to things with almost reckless abandon, with no concern over the preservation of their own lives, much like 40k orcs. So to see their entire species, or at the very least a fleet of this size, just outright running, is terrifying, to say the very least. The Siritan Empire ends up sending exploration fleets into Barramon territory to try and figure out what's going on. Once again, just like with the other factions, it's the same old dance. Planets that are completely bare, stripped of all biomass, whether this be fauna or flora. The majority of mineral deposits across the entire planet, even deep underground, have been completely exhausted. Not only this, but the atmospheres of every habitable planet, or theoretically habitable planet, have been completely stripped. They're quite literally nothing more than inert balls of rock out in the void that just so happen to be the size of planets and moons. The Siritan Empire gets further and further, and they actually end up coming across a Barramon patrol fleet. The Siritan Empire immediately go into full red alert because they're deep within Barramon territory. Chances are the Barramon are going to be very pissed off that the Siritans are there. Yet, once again, it's the same old song and dance. This fleet does not care about the Siritan Empire whatsoever. In fact, they don't even respond to the Siritan Empire's hails. As a result, they're literally just charging into their territory's border between charted and uncharted territory just to get the hell out of Dodge. It should be noted that by the end of the Ruin War, we don't know what happens to these Exodus fleets. They end up going into uncharted territory and they're never heard from again. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire are becoming more and more concerned. This isn't just a few groups. This isn't just a massive warband of Barramon. This appears to be their entire species. And again, the exploration fleet within the Barramon territory was just slightly ahead of the other ones, so needless to say, the Siritan Empire were incredibly concerned about what they were finding. Keep in mind, the Barramon are very protective and very proud of their garden worlds. They protect these garden worlds even at the cost of multiple planets worth of Barramon, if that's what it takes. And to find planets that were most likely garden worlds stripped of all biological material, all mineral deposits, and even the atmosphere of the planet is rattling the Siritan Empire. They have no idea what's going on. And then they finally encounter it. There is a singular plague fleet of moderate size, certainly not large enough to require a name, but big enough that these exploration fleets don't have the means to really fight them. They immediately retreat, reporting back that most likely what the Barramon are talking about when they say the Scourge is most likely a plague fleet. As a result, the Siritan Empire send in one of their specialized fleets designed to deal with plague fleets, and they end up encountering it and wiping it out with some moderate losses. However, the Siritan Empire start noticing the further and further they go into Barramon territory, the more and more plague fleets they're coming across. This is a problem. This isn't just one, this is multiple plague fleets. As a result, the Siritan Empire end up abandoning Barramon territory and getting the hell out, going back to the Barramon-Siritan border and alerting the entire borderline that there could be a mass onslaught of plague fleets. As a result, the Siritan Empire are very much aware, or at least the border is very much aware of what is going on, and information is slowly trickling into the rest of the Siritan Empire, but they don't even have the slightest clue of just how bad this really is. Next up is humanity, and this is by far the faction that the Siritan Empire has the most interaction with during the Ruin War. Now, keep in mind that after the Barramon Exodus fleet entered Siritan territory, a number of Barramon accepted asylum, or the Siritans allowed them asylum within the Siritan Empire. These Barramon were moved to a relatively safe planet, but given the fact that these are still Barramon, it was actually one of the very rare solar systems where the Siritan Empire basically turned almost every single planet into, at the very minimum, a bastion world. An entire solar system of them. Needless to say, if the Barramon decided to cause any trouble, they were going to regret it. Siritan Empire ended up encountering multiple human Exodus fleets. Communications were actually solid between them and the Siritan Empire, and they had stated that the entirety of humanity's territory was under a mass onslaught from hundreds of plague fleets. Now keep in mind, by this point, the Siritan Empire have already set exploration fleets into the Bastilian and Yvetan territories. They're kind of aware of what's going on, but they don't understand the sheer severity of it. This is the first time that they're truly starting to understand what's actually going on when they receive this report. As I said, humanity is telling them that there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of plague fleets rampaging through humanity's territory. As of this moment, humanity's homeworld of Earth is under a mass siege, and it's not looking good. Despite the fact that the Siritan Empire and humanity have been in a blood war since the beginning of time, they immediately request an allegiance with the Siritan Empire. The Siritan Empire, kind of now understanding what is going on, accepts it under the conditions that the humanity will hand over all military assets to Siritan control. The soldiers themselves are still allowed to have their own command structure, but when it comes to the overall humanity's military, or at least what's currently present to them, the Siritan Empire has full authority over where it goes and what it does. Humanity doesn't even think twice and accepts it immediately. Or I guess not humanity as a whole, but this Exodus fleet. The Siritan Empire immediately starts mobilizing the entirety of the 1/5 of the Holy Armada that is normally on humanity's borderline, and they go straight to Earth. When they arrive at Earth, the situation is far more dire than the Exodus fleet had originally thought it was. Almost the entirety of humanity's navy, not just the defense fleet of the Milky Way solar system, but the entirety of their territories and their species' navy is currently within the defense of Earth, and they have lost nearly 7/8 of their entire fleet. Keep in mind that this is a major faction. Their fleets are easily within the trillions, if not quadrillions. They're certainly not as massive as the Siritan Empire, but this is still a lot of ships, and humanity has lost the majority of them already. Earth itself has just started getting landed on by Blight Plague forces. The Siritan Empire immediately mobilizes. They do not wait for any permission from humanity's top brass. They immediately move in and start dealing with whatever plague fleets that they can. Not only this, but the Siritan Empire sends down entire divisions of Siritan Marines on Earth in a desperate attempt to hold back the ground forces of the Blight Plague. The war is long and grueling, and the Siritan Empire suffers massive amounts of casualties. However, in the end, Earth is managed to be saved. The planet itself will never be free from Blight Plague again, at least the biomass, as the biomass is already, humanity is already receiving reports that the biomass is sinking deep within the Earth via caves, so it's unlikely that the planet will ever be clean of it again, but at the very least, for right this moment, Earth is safe. The Exodus fleet tells humanity exactly what is going on and their deal with the Siritan Empire. The president of humanity immediately accepts the terms. The entirety of what remains of humanity immediately seeks asylum within the Siritan Empire, which is approved. At which point, all information about what is going on is given to the Siritan Empire, basically at no cost. They inform them that humanity has been under constant siege from unidentified plague fleets for an incredibly long time now. Not only this, but whilst they don't know the exact name of it, there is an exceptionally massive plague fleet of a level that has never been witnessed before. The Siritan Empire immediately assumed that this is most likely Leviathan, and needless to say, the Siritan Empire is on full alert. They're looking towards humanity right this second because this is the last report that they believe of Leviathan's whereabouts. If we remember, Leviathan broke through its cordon as well as the defense of the HMSSA Dawn's Light like it was nothing. Leviathan is a massive problem, and if it's been gorging itself on humanity's population, chances are it's at a very minimum twice its original size. This is a major issue. Not only this, but it appears to be working with other plague fleets. This is coordination that has never been witnessed before, just with Leviathan alone, never mind the rest of Blight Plague as a whole. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire are freaked out. The entirety of humanity ends up going into Siritan territory, and interestingly enough, they're put on the same planet as the Barramon. Even more interestingly enough is the fact that neither humanity nor the Barramon make any moves to be hostile towards one another. Not only this, but they quite literally have multiple bastion worlds breathing down their necks, making sure that no fighting occurs. It's at this point that the Siritan Empire starts getting reports that they had hoped they would never hear. Reports that they didn't even think was a possibility. The attacks have begun from every single side. Every single border, with the exception of the unexplored reality border with the Siritan Empire, as well as the border between the Siritans and the Florians, is currently being attacked by quite literally uncountable amounts of plague fleets. Individual plague fleets are being identified. This isn't just one massive mass of a singular plague fleet, but at this point, hundreds of millions of different plague fleets. Every single one of these plague fleets having vessels at the very least within the billions of ships. The Siritan Empire is being attacked on all sides, and they are very quickly losing ground. The Siritan Empire was not prepared for this whatsoever, and it was later theorized after the Ruin War that this type of situation was most likely what the other factions had encountered as well. A quite literal blitzkrieg. The Blight Plague coming in from every single angle all at once, and the Siritan Empire, as I just said, were not prepared for this. The border patrols are immediately pushed back by overwhelmingly superior numbers. The Siritan Empire goes into full panic and sends almost every single vessel it has at its disposal, whether those be planetary defense vessels, solar system defense vessels, all the way up to sector defense fleets, all the way to the borders in a desperate attempt to hold the line. Not only this, but the borders have been drawn back by a significant amount. Furthermore, each of the Siritan mega carriers have been deployed as well. These being the HMSS Judgment of Dawn, HMSS Warstock, HMSS Autumn, HMSS Auburn, and HMSS Eternity, despite the fact that the Eternity is actually a refugee ship. It does have some combat capabilities, but of course that's not its purpose. The Siritan Empire are throwing literally everything that they have at it. Almost every single division of Siritan Space Marines are being thrown at the problem. The entirety of the Siritan Holy of the Siritan royal army are being thrown onto worlds in a desperate attempt to hold the line. The Siritan Empire are losing quintillions of members of their faction by the day, constantly being pushed back on all sides. One of the major conflicts, ironically enough, just so happened to be a planet we've talked about before. This being, what the hell was it actually called? Astria, something like that. The Astrian War, I think is what it was. Anyway, this planet was a major boon to the Siritan Empire, as we've talked about before. It produced an enormous amount of food export for the wider Siritan Empire, more than almost any other planet within the Siritan Empire. This planet was heavily fortified due to its incredible importance. The Siritan Empire managed to hold this line for a few years at the very least. Every single day, billions of Siritans and other species were thrown into the meat grinder and either completely obliterated by the Siritan guns when the infected got too close, or turned into nothing more than biomass to fuel the plague fleets that were now attacking. What was even more concerning is that the Siritan Empire officially received reports from the realities west, pretty much from the Barramon's territory. Plague Fleet Leviathan had been spotted and was currently on a direct route to the Siritan core system. The Siritan Empire went into full-blown hysteria at this point, pulling back the majority of their forces as well as all of the Siritan mega-carriers and throwing them at Leviathan. Not only this, but Dawn's Light, who for the most part at this point was largely not particularly useful, was immediately rerouted to intercept Leviathan, despite the fact the last time these two met one another, Leviathan didn't give a damn about Dawn's Light. It's due to this panic and due to the incredible threat that Leviathan poses that the entirety of the Siritan Empire's front lines collapse. The Siritan Empire is in total retreat, and it's around this time that one very specific, very important individual starts taking over the situation and starts setting things right where they need to be. This individual is none other than the Siritan Empire's strategist, Isaiah Tempera. Isaiah immediately gets a understanding of the situation and just how unbelievably bad the situation is. He immediately starts to make various different plans, as he usually does. However, these aren't particularly grandiose plans. These aren't plans that are going to be able to hold the line forever, but they certainly are capable of holding the line now and granting the Siritan Empire time. The fact of the matter is that the Blight Plague forces that are arrayed against the Siritan Empire are on a level that no faction has ever seen before in any reality cycle. This situation is more critical than any of the Siritan Empire's previous collapses. And as a result, Isaiah immediately mobilizes forces where they need to be, defense fleets and quarantine zones where they need to go, and holds the line. Now, at this point, when Isaiah takes control, the Ruin War has gone into full effect and has lasted for a total of 4 years. Keep in mind how insane that is. The Siritan Empire has an uncountable amount of multiverses. At this point, the Siritan Empire has lost nearly 50% of its total territory, 50% of its total multiverses in 4 years. We're not talking about 4 galactic years, we're talking about 4 Earth years. 4 years. And the Siritan Empire has lost 50% of its territory and an unknown amount of soldiers and vessels during this panic period. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire are really showing off some, shall we say, incompetence. However, Isaiah immediately takes control of the reins and kicks the Siritan Empire in the ass, making sure that they're flying straight, and is capable of buying the Siritan Empire a total of 40 years. As a result, Isaiah immediately starts delving deep into his trait known as Seer. Now, we've talked about Seer before. Seer grants Isaiah the ability to see potential futures and the outcomes of said futures. However, it is not guaranteed that he will see a future in which, if he follows all of the steps, it's guaranteed for a victory. And even if he does see such future, due to the natural chaos of war, it's not even guaranteed that if he follows every step that he will get victory, despite having seen a future where victory is guaranteed. Isaiah ends up using this trait for 10 years straight, using it multiple times a day for 10 years straight, and finally he gets to the point where he can no longer use it anymore. Not because he's reached some theoretical limit on what Seer is capable of doing, but more so because his mental faculties are no longer capable of handling the stress. You see, Seer is similar in nature to psionics, although not identical. Seer is counted as a type of magic, as it is a trait magic. However, it has this almost mental effect, similar to neural heat, that builds up every single time it's utilized. Now, Isaiah has been alive for a very, very long time. Needless to say, his mental fortitude is exceptional, especially when compared to normal people within the Siritan Empire. However, even his mental fortitude is not unlimited. In 10 years of utilizing the Seer trait multiple times a day, the exact number per day is unknown, not once did Isaiah see a future in which there was a success. 10 years of using the Seer trait, not a single victory. Failure after failure after failure. Minor differences, major differences. Every time he used it, he would catalog exactly what he saw, building a massive future-based foresight map of how exactly this war was going to go down. Not once was there a victory. And in all of those years of constantly writing things down, comparing various different events, seeing how they may be able to be altered to change the fate of history, it seemed almost a certainty that the Siritan Empire was going to collapse. 10 years of using this, and there was no victory in sight. Luckily, Isaiah had another 30 years to prepare. Isaiah immediately knew that this war was going to go down to the very final planet. This war was going to go down to the Siritan Empire's final bastion. It was going to go down to Ostengrad. As a result, Isaiah began preparing, constantly sending out more and more forces, constantly building more and more ships, supplies, training more soldiers, building more tanks and aircraft, manufacturing more weapons and ammunition, sending them to the front lines in a desperate attempt to hold back the Blight Plague just a little bit longer. And he was capable of doing it for 30 years. The entire time, Isaiah was completely restructuring the defense of the Siritan core system. Isaiah was absolutely hell-bent that if they were going to get pushed back to Ostengrad, he was going to make Leviathan and the rest of the Plague fleets pay in blood. Not long after this 10-year cycle of him utilizing the seer trait was over, he immediately ordered Dawn's Light to retreat and to stay a respectful distance away from the Civitan core system. Due to the insanity that is Dawn's Light's size, its very presence can affect the gravitational forces of an entire solar system. Dawn's Light is categorized as a solar cruiser, and it is multiple trillions of miles long. It is quite literally the length of a solar system. It is a truly titanic vessel that is the pinnacle of Civitan engineering. However, as I just said, it's so massive that its mass alone is capable of affecting not only the gravitational pull of planets, but perhaps even the gravitational pull of the core system's star, or any star, really. As a result, it has to stay out in deep space, lest it may end up causing problems. I'll leave that for you to figure out exactly what that means. The Civitan Empire are very well aware that once the Blight Plague enters their universe, specifically the galaxy that the Civitan core system is within, they will be attacking from the galactic west. As a result, that is exactly where Dawn's Light is posted. Dawn's Light would be the first vessel to encounter Leviathan and presumably the bulk of the Blight Plague in assault. Now, the Civitan Empire has been doing really good work at this point. They've even mobilized a few Barramon and human forces in a desperate attempt to help on the front lines, and they have destroyed countless amounts of plague fleets, to the point where when we get to the actual siege of Ostengrad, it is believed that almost every single plague fleet out there has been completely and utterly destroyed, save for some of the biggest ones, especially Leviathan itself. We do receive confirmed reports that another very dangerous plague fleet Naga, was in fact destroyed on this front line during this 30-year period. Needless to say, with Naga being the second largest plague fleet out there, that was pretty good news for the Civitan Empire, but not exactly the best, as Leviathan is still out there rampaging through the Civitan Empire. Make no mistake, this front line was holding back the entirety of the Blight Plague's advance, with the exception of Leviathan. Isaiah already knew that there was going to be absolutely nothing in his arsenal that could slow Leviathan down. All they could do was chip away at it, but for the love of everything that is holy, don't get in front of it. As a result, Leviathan, due to its sheer size and weight of ships, was excruciatingly slow. Isaiah basically pulled back the entire front line around Leviathan, having them peppering it from its flanks, meanwhile just allowing it to continue on its journey towards the Civitan core system. There wasn't a damn thing that they could do. Isaiah's defense was a complete 180 of what we've described Ostengrad to be in the past. This was largely just due out of pure necessity. Aside from Dawn's Light being out on the farthest reaches of the Civitan core system, there was also the First Response Fleet. This was a newly constructed fleet, primarily consisting of frigates and destroyers that had been completely gutted and jammed packed full of various different sensing equipment, at which point the vessels themselves would run completely dark. If it wasn't absolutely necessary, it was turned off, which means that basically the ship's batteries and capacitors were filled to maximum, and then power generation, even down to life support, was shut off. This crew was given to the absolute bare minimum. They were skeleton crews. And not only this, but they had to survive solely off of oxygen tanks within their suits, due to the fact that, again, life support was off on these vessels. They wanted to reduce the odds of any plague fleet detecting them as much as possible. That way they could gather as much information and send it directly to the Civitan Empire's final bastion of Ostengrad, specifically the Central Command Nexus. After this was at the very outer edges of the solar system. Now, the solar system itself, we've never actually said what the Siritan core system's name is. Its name is Zadrian, the Zadrian system. It is comprised of a total of 7 planets, only 2 of which are actually named, these being Thalcia and Ostengrad. The rest of them are simply given a numerical title, this being Zadrian 1, Zadrian 2, Zadrian 3, Zadrian 5, Zadrian 6, and Zadrian 7. No, Zadrian 5 isn't one of them, because, yeah, it's 2 out of 7. Anyway. At the very outer part of the solar system within Zadrian 7's orbital path was the primary bulk of the Siritan Empire's remaining navy. The fact of the matter is that whatever was on the front lines was pretty much as good as dead at this point. Their sole purpose was to hold the line for as long as possible. They were being reinforced constantly, but Isaiah did not expect these fleets to come back to aid Ostengrad and the core system in the final battle. As a result, whatever vessels were left over were dedicated purely towards the defense of the core system. Most notably, by this time, or at least at the time of the attack of the Siritan core system, the Siritan Empire is down to 3 of its mega carriers, these being the HMSS Judgment of Dawn, the HMSS Asmodeus, as the Warstock was destroyed and the Asmodeus was created, although the Asmodeus at this point is kind of a pseudo mega carrier, as some of the hyper exotic minerals and resources required to make vessels the size of continents, needless to say, the Siritan Empire didn't have any in storage, as the Siritan Empire isn't limited because, they can only manufacture 1 mega carrier at a time, so that's why they only have like 5 of them. It's because the Siritan Empire only had enough resources for 5 of them. The final mega carrier is the HMSS Autumn, and is specifically the Autumn that is on the very outer orbital path within Zadrian 7. The Autumn has a massive flotilla with it, which is basically its own personal defense fleet. Every single vessel that is in that area is under the direct command of the Autumn, and more specifically, the individual that is aboard the Autumn at this time, this being none other than Siritan Calamity, the Blade Lord Mikaela. Mikaela is aboard the Autumn, and the reasoning for this is because Mikaela's magic is uniquely tailored for this type of situation. Due to the fact that he has the ability known as Deluge, he can create a near infinite amount of blades. Some of these blades can even reach the size of the Empire State Building and launch them at the enemy fleet. Not only this, but due to the fact that his magic is largely dedicated or connected to his willpower, they're more or less indestructible, meaning that his magic is going to be invaluable at holding the line against Leviathan, as that's exactly where the Autumn is, directly in its path, along the galactic west line. As a result, Dawn's Light will be the first thing to encounter Leviathan, and it will fire absolutely everything that it has. An entire solar system's worth of guns will be firing at Leviathan in a desperate attempt to deal as much damage as possible. The fact of the matter is that this war is solely dependent on whether or not the Siritan Empire can actually take down Leviathan. Now, this entire time, Leviathan has been slowly shaved down due to these flanking fleets constantly attacking them. These fleets have constantly been suffering casualties, as Leviathan is having none of their bullshit, but they're still doing damage. The important question, though, is, will it be enough damage? After Dawn's Light, as I said, is the Autumn and its personal flotilla. These vessels are specifically designed to handle Leviathan. It should be noted that when it comes to void combat, especially for the Siritan Empire, it has its normal guns, and then due to the unique way that the Blight Plague fights within the void of space, they also have guns specifically tailored towards fighting the Blight Plague. These oftentimes are weapons that massively outrange the vessels and their infection spires, which are quite literally massive chitinous spikes filled with hyper-pressurized Blight Plague biomass that are literally shot at ships, and the second they pierce through the hull of a ship, that pressurized Blight Plague biomass is ejected through the entire ship, infecting a ship in less than a couple of minutes. As a result, the Siritan Empire has weapons specifically designed to outrange these vessels and deal enough damage to them before they can get anywhere near close. However, due to the incredible threat that Leviathan poses and the fact that it has more biomass than any plague fleet that has ever been seen before, chances are it's likely to have armaments that are capable of competing in terms of sheer range alone. As a result, this flotilla with the Autumn has been further fortified and upgraded in an attempt to ensure that no matter what happens, they will have superior firepower and superior range, or at least theoretically. The Autumn itself has been retrofitted extensively, being equipped with experimental technology that is believed to be incredibly stable. The last thing Isaiah needs is when this assault finally kicks off and Leviathan gets within range, the last thing that he needs is the Autumn spontaneously self-destructing due to prototype technology. As a result, the Autumn, whilst certainly now the heaviest hitting ship in all of the core system, has a significantly less chance of spontaneously exploding, but not a 0% chance. The third line of defense is the absolutely insane concept of a void-based minefield on the very outer edges of the entirety of the core solar system. We've talked about this before. The Siritan Empire basically made void versions of depth charges, and in a full sphere around the core system, made a massive minefield. Needless to say, this is going to be invaluable when Leviathan first hits, as chances are Leviathan isn't going to think much of these little void depth charges until it's probably too late. The fact of the matter is that due to the size of Leviathan, the Siritan Empire isn't aware of just how intelligent it is at this point. As we're well aware, Blight Plague becomes more intelligent the more biomass it has at its disposal. At this point, the size of Leviathan is completely unknown. The Siritan Empire knows for a fact that it's at the very minimum twice its original size, and before then it was already intelligent enough to be able to break through its cordon, despite the fact not actually using any tactics. As a result, they have no idea what Leviathan is really bringing to the table or how intelligent it really is at this point. Chances are all of these defenses will be completely useless. By the time the core system is actually attacked, the orbital platforms around Ostengrad, the 6 geostationary heavy weapons platforms, are basically offline. The heavy weapons platforms suffered major malfunctions during this entire engagement, believed to possibly be due to the Blight Plague. As a result, their normal power generation was somehow disabled. The Siritan Empire immediately started shunting energy from multiple Dyson spheres in an attempt to power the weapons. However, these Dyson spheres were inevitably destroyed by the Blight Plague, due to the fact that they were advanced enough to know what a Dyson sphere was and why it's probably important to destroy a Dyson sphere. As a result, these heavy weapons platforms solely have whatever their batteries had left in terms of charge. As a result, Isaiah turns them off and is going to be saving them for a critical situation in which their overwhelming firepower will be invaluable. Suffice to say, they don't have enough charge to start fighting at the very beginning of the battle. Almost every single planet within the core system, with the exception of Ostengrad itself, has been completely and utterly sterilized. All fauna and flora on the planets have been completely and utterly purged. That being said, the Siritan Empire has saved DNA strands and various different seeds in massive seed vaults within realitorial anchor zones. Suffice to say that if they survive all of this, they will have all of the genetic information and DNA required to repopulate these worlds. But right now, the last thing they need is giving this Blight Plague even more biomass to work with while they're actively attacking the Siritan Empire. Next up is the asteroid field. The majority of the asteroid field has been completely exhausted. Only a few massive asteroids still exist out there, which have largely been cored out and turned into defense cannons. That being said, these defense cannons aren't capable of moving, have extremely limited ammunition, and relatively short range due to the, shall we say, somewhat unstable nature of an asteroid. They will certainly help to slow down the front lines, but these soldiers won't be doing much. Finally, we have the two most important planets within the Siritan core system, these being Thalsia and Ostengrad itself. Most interestingly of all is their unique orbital path. Both planets orbit around the star. However, the planets themselves also orbit one another at the same time, far enough away where they won't get caught within each other's gravity well and tug towards one another, but constantly circling around each other while circling around their sun. As a result, the two planets are always relatively close to one another and are usually capable of mutually defending one another in situations where the core system is under attack. Due to the importance of Thalsia and a number of important and immovable resources and machines on Thalsia, the entire planet was evacuated and moved to Ostengrad. Save for a very small detachment that almost nobody noticed. You see, Isaiah hasn't told everybody every single detail of what's going down. One of the most interesting details is the fact that Isaiah sent a very small detachment down to Thalsia. They're literally the only living things left on the planet. More interestingly is the fact that they were sent below the Siritan Empire's palace. I'm forgetting exactly what the name of it was. This detachment was a number of hyper-specialized engineers, as well as some of the Siritan Empire's finest warriors. These specifically being known as the Zadrian Champions. Now, we need to go into a little mini deep dive on the Zadrian Champions to really get an idea of who these guys are. When it comes to the Siritan Empire's armed forces, we have the Siritan Royal Army. This is considered the bog standard. You can basically think of them similar to the Astra Militarum of Warhammer 40k. After that, you have the Siritan Royal Vanguard. The Siritan Royal Vanguard is tasked with protecting the Siritan core system, but more specifically protecting Ostengrad. They are some of the most elite warriors the Siritan Empire has at their disposal that aren't augmented in some way, shape, or form, turning them into super soldiers like the Siritan Marines and Marauders. However, within the Siritan Royal Vanguard, there are obviously those who are considered to be the exemplars, the elites of the elites, the true cream of the crop, shall we say. These individuals have been given the title of the Zadrian Champions. These are individuals that are about as close as you can possibly get for a normal soldier, being on the same level as Siritan's Supreme Commander Marcus Bane and Siritan General Captain James Beckett. These are some badass people that are considered to be quite literal unaugmented gods of war. These are the most experienced, the most heavily trained, the most heavily armed and armored individuals in the Siritan Empire that, again, aren't categorized as super soldiers. So it's relatively bizarre that these champions of the Siritan Empire aren't going to be fighting on Thalcia, where the main assault is going to be, but rather, or on Ostengrad, but rather sent to Thalcia, a planet that is completely void of life, as it was intentional, and for some reason guarding specialists that were also sent there. The exact details of what's going on down there and exactly what they are doing are unknown, unfortunately, and we won't find out until near the end of the siege of Ostengrad itself. So you guys are going to have that to look forward to. Finally, there is Ostengrad itself. The primary fortress city, also ironically enough named Ostengrad, has received a major tune-up. Ostengrad itself is defended by 4 walls. Each of these walls are a mile thick, comprised of solstite and corrodium armor plating between multiple hundreds of meters worth of plastcrete. Plastcrete is essentially a combination of hyper-durable metals similar to something like plasteel mixed with various different forms of concrete. It is incredibly durable and is one of the main building resources within the Siritan Empire, utilized in almost everything. Needless to say, the walls are insanely durable. Not only this, but throughout each and every single one of the walls are essentially, would be a good word for it, almost like pillboxes. They're basically little rooms that are carved into the side of the walls that have various different guns mounted within them. These can include things such as direct fire artillery pieces, as well as heavy auto cannons, even mortars in some rare cases. Each of the 4 walls are defended in this way. However, the Siritan Empire has a bit of a problem, and that is the first wall. You see, the first wall of Ostengrad was never designed for a war of attrition. The first wall was designed to show the might of what the Siritan Empire is capable of, assuming that the enemy would notice just how dangerous the wall is and immediately decide to, well, for lack of a better way of putting this, fuck off and not attack Ostengrad any longer. The corridors within the first wall are incredibly narrow, and whilst they do permit ammunition trains, the expected quantity of blight plague that will be attacking the first wall is far beyond what these ammunition trains are going to be capable of supplying. The first wall is constantly being excavated and modified in an attempt to allow for as much ammunition as possible, but the fact of the matter is that once again, even down to the guns within the walls were never designed for this type of combat. As a result, the Siritan Empire has already basically accepted the fact that the first wall is not going to last very long. As a result, the majority of military assets are set to the second wall. The Siritan Empire are also rolling out a brand new form of defense that has only ever been seen on Ostengrad purely out of necessity, and this is known as the Mithra Airstrike. The Mithra Airstrike is absolutely absurd because the Siritan Empire are quite literally using any and every idea at this point in a desperate attempt to gain any form of advantage against the onslaught that is on its way. The Mithra airstrikes are quite literally Siritan interceptors, aircraft, or rather void craft, that are designed to be usually sent at enemy fleets in an attempt to harry them within atmospheric conditions. They're capable of going insanely fast. We're talking multiple Mach speeds, and upon arriving at their destination, quite literally saturated carpet bombing the area with incredibly high yield and high intensity kinetic and energy based explosives. Not only this, but the Seritan Empire have developed a brand new method of bringing the Queston Planet Cracker artillery piece into the battlefield, creating multiple anti-gravity platforms and putting the Questons on top of them. Unfortunately, due to the rushed nature of the defense and having to set up a quite literal continent-sized city for a theoretically infinitely long siege, the Seritan Empire didn't exactly have time to perfect these platforms. The platforms are just barely capable of withstanding the recoil from the Questons. And keep in mind that the Questons essentially fire shells, artillery pieces, or artillery shells, that when they detonate with tactical nuclear force, without actually being nukes themselves. They are absolutely devastating and will be essential at holding the line. Unfortunately, the Seritan Empire doesn't have time to make a lot of these. As a result, these Questons are going to have to be used very tactfully. Furthermore, the Seritan Empire has requisitioned a massive army of Seritan war machines, Seritan ultra-heavy tanks. They have brought in an innumerable amount of Seritan Marines and Marauders into the battlefield. The entirety of the Seritan Royal Vanguard has been mobilized. Not only this, but the very layout of the city has been changed to provide an even more defensible position. The majority of the fighting will be at the walls themselves, usually leaving the urban setting to the Blight Plague, and they're allowed to do pretty much whatever they want, with various teams setting out on sorties for the little amount of time that they'll have before the walls are begin getting attacked in full force. Needless to say, the situation isn't looking good. But of course, we're still missing two important pieces to this puzzle, these being the Asmodeus and the Judgment of Dawn. Where exactly are these two? Well, both are in high orbital anchor around Ostengrad itself, with the Judgment of Dawn being on the galactic west side, being ready to intercept the Leviathan when it arrives, with the Asmodeus on galactic east pretty much set to defend the rest of the territory whilst the Judgment is busy. The Judgment of Dawn is crewed by the Seritan Empire's most elite crew when it comes to ships. Not only this, but it is personally being commanded by none other than Seritan Calamity, the Molten King Duran, due to the fact that his spell Incineration is capable of being used in the void of space, which, needless to say, immolating multiple vessels with a singular spell probably going to help out a significant amount. Finally, the Asmodeus is being personally commanded by none other than the High Seritan Commander himself, Zion. And this is due to the fact that his Void Lightning abilities, much like Mikaela and Duran, are capable of being used, well, in the void of space. As a result, he'll be invaluable in holding the line on the other side of the planet. With that, we have covered absolutely everything. We're not going to be necessarily covering the entirety of the attack of the core system, but we're probably in the next episode going to be going into episode 1 of the Siege of Ostengrad. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are looking forward to that. I hope you guys are looking forward to Saturday and Sunday's live streams at noon Central Standard Time, where we are doing RimWorld and Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out, and then right back here next Tuesday with more Shattered Legacies deep dives. Until then, guys, see ya.